All right, hello everyone. So this is going to be a recorded lecture. I would have done this lecture live, except that StreamYard has changed up some things on me, and I'm no longer able to share videos with you guys. And I have a video I wanted to, little clip that I wanted to share with you all. There's a debate that it shows up every so often online. I had been meaning to actually discuss this, gosh, months ago. I took a little clip and I wanted to have this conversation because it's one that it interests me as a lover of the medieval church. The pertinence to and relevance to the conversation that happens in the year 2025 of our Lord is just super fascinating to me, how these things don't really change. The more things change, the more they stay the same. What I'm referring to is this debate around whether or not it's just a it's such a bad state of affairs right now in the West, in America, for young men who are risking a great financial ruin, a great reputational ruin when they take on a wife. So because of that, this argument, this line of thinking is that young men outside of a religious context should avoid marriage altogether. And one of the people who regularly brings this up is this host from a podcast that's on YouTube called The Whatever Show or The Whatever Podcast. It's run by a guy named Brian. And I think my understanding is that this is something that his clips will show up on X every once in a while, and I've heard him say it several times. But he also regularly brings on this guy named Andrew Wilson, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And Andrew I don't know whether he's just sort of patronizing Brian a little bit and just sort of agreeing with him, or this is something that he's like seriously thought through and he agrees with. But he tends to himself parade this narrative towards young men. And I think, to give Andrew the benefit of the doubt, I know he's a controversial character and he often says things I disagree with, but he says things I agree with as well at times. So to give him the benefit of the doubt here, Andrew is, I think, only recently, if he's even in the Orthodox Church yet, I think he's only recently come to the Orthodox Church. And he's probably, if I had to guess, coming from a secular or perhaps Protestant background. He's certainly not coming from a Catholic background. But the Orthodox don't have the same, let's say, the same feelings on these things, the same teachings on these things that we do. So it wouldn't follow that he would have the same position that we do, especially coming, again, from the secular background. So he's probably just more inclined to agree with Brian. So I'm going to play a clip. It's going to be just a short clip of this sort of. I found this. I went searching for it. It's going to be Andrew Wilson on the Whatever Show making this argument about marriage, and then we'll pick up on the other side of it.
I think marriage is a holy sacrament. But what I don't understand is what incentive an atheist has to get married. Like, I actually don't understand. If I was an atheist man, I would not want to get married. It's literally fixed against them. So what would their incentive be? Like, can you give me a good argument if I was an atheist, let's say? Give me a single good argument for why I should get married.
Well, obviously, like as she mentioned, the legal benefits, but also is because, a lot of people say that marriage is just a piece of paper and but like these things have meaning. Like our college diploma, like that's just a piece of paper, but it has meaning. Money,
Well,
it
what's
has
the meaning for me?
You're putting it on paper, you're finalizing it. So
yeah, why can't I finalize it by just declaring it?
Well, usually you need a written
why do you need that? Like, you're not anti-marriage, but neither is Brian, neither am I. What we bring up is the point that I can't think, other than you being religious, what the purpose is for atheists and agnostics to get married. So she brings up things like health insurance, things like this, right? You can have all the perks of all of that absent marriage. You can forward your will absent marriage. You can name people as your life insurance beneficiary absent marriage. Like, you can do all of these things absent marriage. Even when it comes to tax brackets, marriage doesn't even give you that much of a benefit there. And your earned income child credit, you get that even if you're not married. So it's like, what is actually the incentive for men to take that risk, even if there was these tiny offsets, let's say? The risk is oh, okay, well, we can get a divorce and the state takes half my kid and gives it to her. How do you incentivize an atheist man to marry a woman? Tell me how.
Okay, so that's Andrew's argument. That's the point that he makes. There's also, which I will put on the screen right now, a tweet, a post from the great philosophical mind of our generation, Andrew Tate. And Andrew Tate is, of course, I believe, I think he may have converted to Islam. I don't follow these guys too closely, so if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. He's either nominally a Muslim or he's just secular. And Andrew, look, here's the thing about Andrew Tate. He'll occasionally put his finger on the pulse of what the problem is, but more often than not, his solutions are, I want to say he does, if I'm reading Andrew Tate right, I think a lot of what he does is for comedic effect, and he does it with a degree of irony. So I don't want to be sitting here like lecturing the guy on things that he's, in my opinion, from what I can tell, clearly being somewhat tongue in cheek about, being cheeky, as the English would say. But he certainly does ruffle up some feathers. And with this particular post, asking what good is marriage for a man, marriage qua marriage, man qua man, he doesn't even really make the religious distinction. This I think is a worthwhile conversation to have with you guys. And the way that I'm going to go about it is we're going to spend some time with Denzinger. I know you all keep your Denzinger handy, right? You keep him on standby. We're going to spend a little bit of time with the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And whenever you guys are going through these things, I highly recommend that you have your catechism handy. I highly recommend that you have Denzinger on standby because whether you're drawing from the historical background, whether you're drawing from the theological background, we need to, as Catholics, I think, have a comprehensive answer to these things. Because what I don't want to do, which is what I think I see, Andrew has been having a little bit of a back and forth apparently online on this particular conversation with Matt Walsh. And Matt Walsh is a Catholic. I don't know how well educated he is in the faith, but he's a Catholic. Says correct things every once in a while. But I feel like at times Catholics will downplay the maybe the possible reality that young men are facing in this moment. And so what I would like to do is I would like to begin by acknowledging and not gaslighting young men who are saying that for all that they can tell, for all that they can look at, this looks like a rigged game. Marriage looks like a setup to lead them, as I said, to financial or reputational ruin. And it's a lot of young men. Apparently, the feeling and the trend in this is that they're resigned to just kind of check out from the whole thing. And in response to a lot of this, a lot of these young men, they'll get called incels, they'll get called, that they misogynist, that they hate women, and that this problem really doesn't exist, that they just need to do better, right? And it's almost like when the Me Too movement came out, I felt like with the Me Too movement, there was potentially some good arguments being made. There was a good, deep, deep down in the recesses beyond the total chaotic nightmare that became the Me Too movement. There was a potential argument to be made about typically men who are in positions of power, leveraging that power for sexual favors against women who are trying to, better themselves, whether or not that woman may have been knowledgeable or not of, said intentions of man and placed herself in that situation. That's a conversation that kind of got suppressed in that whole thing, which I think was relevant to the conversation. But what I'm trying to say is, I see a similarity here where all the people that came after the Me Too movement, these are often sometimes the same people that are making this argument about marriage today, and then the people that were, saying believe all women during the Me Too movement are now like attempting to gaslight young men who feel this way about what's actually taking place. And I will say, and I don't think this is something that, unless you are just completely removed, and look, if you're completely removed from this stuff, like God bless you, that's great. Social media is a giant crap show in many ways. So if you're removed from that, that's fine. But if you are removed from it, you probably shouldn't be a part of the conversation, and you probably shouldn't be telling these men that, to not trust their lying eyes. Because the reality is that social media has changed the gender dynamics. It has changed the access that young women in particular have. It has changed who their potential prospects for partners are. It is basically like a giant feast of options, a table full of options for young women as they step into the world of social media. If they post pictures of themselves on Instagram, if they, I don't know. I mean, the big complaint is how they will leverage like pictures of themselves to elicit attention from men. And look, if you, like I said, you spend a little bit of time on this, even those women who claim to be, sort of ignorant of these things, or who claim to have like a different intention in posting said pictures, all you have to do is spend time like going through the comments, and you can see that there's just a flood of attention thrown at these women. Now, there's probably the occasional woman who is immune to all of that, who doesn't really, think anything of that. But if you can imagine, right, your average 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old young lady in the world today, maybe she's had somewhat of a religious upbringing, probably hasn't, probably more secular than anything. She sees the clout, the reputation that these women are getting online via Instagram, via TikTok, and some of these views, the engagement that some of these women get are in the millions. And she puts out some pictures of herself. Maybe it's modest by degree, maybe it's not. Regardless, it sends in this flood of compliments and validation and affirmation. And so that tends to skew, I think, how a young woman is formed, completely changes her prospects. Meanwhile, young men, which has always been the case for young men have to, we've like as men, unless you're just incredibly attractive, and this was never me, right? But like unless you're that like incredibly attractive guy who no matter what you do, women are gonna like pay attention to you. To be noticed, like men have to step out and above and beyond. And honestly, that's a whole nother conversation. But to be noticed, like men have to have some level of like greatness about them that takes years to achieve. Not so for young women. And so I feel like, because you got to remember, like young guys don't have if you put yourself back when you were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, like it takes a while for you to have a good perspective of the world and its dynamics and the reality of the way that things are. So these young guys, man, it seems for a lot of them that based on their sort of limited view and scope of things, that this is just a really awful setup. And like right at the beginning, I want to be clear that like I understand that, and I'm not here to tell you guys that you just need to like shut up and find that one, regardless of what her reputation is, regardless of what she's done. If she's willing to accept you, just marry her, and the rest is history. And so this debate comes down to whether or not marriage qua marriage is a good thing. And as Catholics, this is a Catholic channel, I'm going to take a approach that I feel like will help you guys sort of navigate the situation that we're in right now, and maybe be able to give some more of what I consider informed responses. Because like the one thing I want to be careful about in all of this is if you try to like walk some middle line too often, You end up being like over nuanced, hyper nuanced. There's some people that made a reputation for doing that, and you end up really not standing for anything. So my goal is not to do that. My goal is to present what the Catholic Church says as our like foundational system of how we're going to approach the real world problems as they come at us. And I'm not going to like try to like nuance away that problem like it doesn't exist. So the first thing I think in order to make sense of that is we have to separate the idea and the concepts of a natural marriage versus a sacramental marriage. And the well, let me begin with the end, right? The end is that when Christ comes, he speaks to the apostles and he institutes and his followers and he institutes the sacramental element of marriage. This is marriage within the Catholic context, as far as marriage which provides us with graces. But he also says that marriage was there from the beginning. And all along, there has been marriage, right? So from the beginning, we're going all the way back then to the beginning. So from the time of Adam and Eve forward, marriage has been there. That's natural marriage. And so the thing about a natural marriage is that it has to have certain, let's see, it has to have certain qualifications for it to be a natural marriage. So when Catholic missionaries, for example, are going out into the world and they're running up against pagan cultures, they're trying to see, okay, in this culture, this thing that's happening between a man and a woman, because oftentimes pagan cultures have some easy, incorrect, though they're striving towards the natural law, right? But they have to like make sense of what is the errors of this and what is the truth of this. And so, like for example, when the I mean my mind is always on the Jesuits and the work that they did among the American Indians, but the American Indians practiced polygamy. So it was a matter of, okay, you want to be baptized, that's fine. You have to actually choose one of these women as the woman that is your wife that you are going to be, faithful to and committed to, and we will, what's the word? We will provide as best we can for these other women, and but the marriage is going to be between you. And so to get baptized as American Indian, you basically had to let go of your wives except for one, and that would be the natural marriage. Though of course, to come into the church, they would end up having to have a sacramental marriage. All right, so then we must look at what qualifies as a natural marriage. What are the boundaries within this massively diverse world that we live in, where the missionary could go out and say, okay, this is a natural marriage, this is not a natural marriage. Well, the church gives us the criteria for that. A few of the things to be on the lookout for. Mutual consent. Was the marriage a shotgun marriage, or was it two parties, man, woman, who agree to come together into this union? Shotgun marriages, of course, being where the young man takes certain liberties with the young woman, and the young woman's father, brother, uncles show up to the young man's house with a shotgun and says, "You will now marry my daughter," right? So this is not what that is. It has to be the consent of two parties. There has to be a certain capacity among the two parties, the capacity for them to willingly assent to it, right? There's no like mental impediments. There's the capacity that they are both properly single. They're not in another marriage. Their capacity that they are of the right genders, the right sex, right? Male, female, that they're not related to any degree that's forbidden. They must be open to children. The union itself must be intended to be permanent until death. So that's actually pretty strict criteria for what qualifies as a natural marriage. Now, you can go into a culture, a non-Christian culture, and the church is trying to do two things. we are trying to evangelize and bring the gospel to people and bring people into the fold. And the idea would be that once within the fold they get married, they go through this sacramental marriage. But in the meantime, not everybody's going to convert at once. It's a long process. The church is also trying to like push the culture, the non-Catholic culture, towards a sense of natural marriage. So even the Indians, even those Indians which didn't jump into baptism, which didn't want to, make that leap right away, the missionaries would still preach and evangelize to these people the necessity of marriage meeting these criterias, right? So another problem that they had with the Native American concept of marriage was that they weren't permanent. This was a problem a lot of Native American women dealt with, which was abandonment. It was a common feature of their marriages. So, regardless of whether or not, said person is Catholic or not, the missionaries, if the woman comes to the missionary and she's not Catholic and she says, "My husband's going to abandon me," the missionaries would then go and attempt to, if possible, reason with that husband and, try to instill this concept of natural marriage as it was intended by God from the beginning within a non-Catholic culture. But where does all of this like come from, right? That's kind of the question. And you guys know I am very much into the historical questions. Now, I have a book in storage. It's like 1,000-page book. It was published by the Cambridge University Press, and it's on the development specifically of marriage. I don't have the title of it handy with me right now. It's very, very common title. It's something like The Development of Marriage in the Catholic Church, something very, subtle like that. And this book is just super fascinating. It's a long read, but you learn so much about how we get to where we were because it's almost taken for granted that Luther and the Protestants reject the sacraments, which is, of course, as a Catholic, we would consider this to be an error. But most Catholics that I have run into don't actually have any concept of why Luther and the Protestants may have decided to reduce the sacraments down to two, because they saw within their own, hermeneutics of rupture, as they tend to, the lens they tend to wear, they see these developments as they take place in the High Middle Ages as a corruption of the pristine gospel, which was, in their eyes, explicitly only two sacraments, baptism and the Eucharist. And so there is historically a sense in which the conversation can take place about how development happens over time. But the reality is, as Catholics, that the theological fruit of this idea of marriage as a sacrament really comes into its own in the High Middle Ages. Now, again, there's precedent for it all the way back to the beginning. It's not that like the early church didn't see it as a sacrament. It's just that the way the like what's the word I'm looking for? It's not unlike the debates around the canon of scripture, right? And it's almost an epistemic claim. Like, once the church makes a decision on something, do you, like a definitive decision, like this is the canon of scripture, do you then therefore have the right to go back and say, well, look at this historical roadmap? It's all over the place. And then, there's these people who say that these books are part of scripture, these books aren't. And then they disagree here and they don't. So, like, when the church makes this decision, does the church have the authority to make that decision? So there were ongoing debates around how many sacraments there are. Was there seven? Was there more than seven? Was the sacramental sign of anointing the king with oil, right? Is that an eighth sacrament? So the church at this point in these high Middle Ages is they're looking at these things, they're arguing them, they're seeing the historical trajectory in the same way that, say, Florence or Trent was looking at the canon of Scripture and they're making a decision. And so you have to turn to the High Middle Ages and the arguments that are taking place at that period to see what a natural marriage was as it comes to be defined versus what a sacramental marriage is as it comes to be defined, what demarcates the two, and the fact that it is actually a true sacrament instituted by Christ. As well, it's a true natural institution instituted by God in the beginning. These are all things that the church has developed over time through its process of discussing things like the natural law. And so, what I want to cover here is I want to go through, let me look at my notes. Right. So, the development, sacramental marriage. All right. So, what I want to do here is I want to start with Denzinger. And Denzinger is going to be a helpful source for making this thing that I'm talking about, where we're looking at the historical trajectory of how the marriage as a sacrament versus marriage as a natural institution comes to be. And so one of the key thinkers in this is going to be Innocent III, Pope from 1198 to 1216. He's a brilliant canon lawyer. This is the period of canon law in the Catholic Church where it really comes into its own. Innocent III, this is the Fourth Lateran Council. This is the era of the Gregorian reforms. There's a lot of discussion around marriage at this time. I could pick out, let's see, Alexander III, the bond of matrimony. There's quite a bit in the Innocent III's works about marriage. There's quite a bit in, let's see, Fourth Lateran Council about marriage. But I want to particularly hone in on Innocent III. This is Denzinger 407, Marriages of the Pagans. And I'm going to quote here at length so that you can get an idea of this idea of natural marriage as it's sort of coming about within the context of the High Middle Ages. So, quote, "You have asked to be shown through apostolic writings whether pagans receiving wives in the second, third, or fourth degree ought, thus united, to remain after their conversion with the wives, united to them, or ought to be separated from them." So pagans are coming into the Catholic faith. They're bringing a wife with them. Do they need to be separated from this wife, or do they bring this wife within the fold? Especially if the wife is not converted herself. Regarding this, we reply to your brotherhood thus, that since the sacrament of marriage exists between believing and unbelieving spouses, as the apostle points out when he says, "If any brother has an unbelieving wife and she consents to live with him, let him not put her away." 1 Corinthians 7:12. And since in the aforesaid degree matrimony is lawfully contracted with respect to them by pagans who are not restricted by canonical constitutions. He quotes scripture here, "For what is it to me, according to the same apostle, to judge concerning those which are outside?" 1 Corinthians. In favor especially of the Christian religion and faith, from receiving which many, fearing to be deserted by their wives, can easily be restrained, such believers, having been joined in marriage, can freely and licitly remain united, since through the sacrament of baptism marriages are not dissolved, but sins are forgiven. But since pagans divide their conjugal affection among many women at the same time, it is rightly doubted whether, after conversion, all or which one of all they can retain. But this practice seems to be in disagreement with and inimical to the Christian faith, since in the beginning one rib was changed into one woman. And divine scripture testifies that on account of this, man shall leave father and mother and shall cling to his wife, and they shall be two in one flesh. It does not say three or more, but two, nor did it say he will cling to wives, but to a wife. Never is it permitted to anyone to have several wives at one time, except to whom it was granted by divine revelation. This custom existed at one time, sometimes was regarded as lawful, by which, as Jacob from a lie, the Israelites from theft, Samson from homicide, so also the patriarchs and other just men, who we read had many wives at the same time, were excused from adultery. Certainly this opinion is proved true also by the witness of truth, which testifies in the gospel, whoever puts away his wife, except on account of fornication, and marries another, commits adultery. If therefore, when the wife has been dismissed, another cannot be married according to law, all the more she cannot herself be retained. Man dismisses his pagan wife according to the law, he cannot be married again, nor can she be married again. Through this, it clearly appears that regarding marriage plurality in either sex, since they are not judged unequally, must be condemned. Moreover, he, according to his right, puts away a lawful wife, since the truth in the gospel has condemned such a repudiation. Never while she lives, even after being converted to the faith of Christ, can he have another wife, unless after his conversion she refuses to live with him, and even if she should consent, yet not without insult to the Creator, so on and so forth. So the idea here is that as Innocent is looking at this situation, he's confronted with the fact that you have a husband, a man, he's coming into the faith. His wife is not coming into the faith. Can he put her away? If she has consented to the marriage, then Innocent is saying that that's a true and contractual marriage. She cannot be put away. He is united to her in a lifelong union, a natural marriage. So, theologically speaking, then, what are the actual perks of a natural marriage? Now, we know that as Catholics, there are going to be certain perks to a Catholic sacramental marriage that aren't going to be there in the natural marriage. But what I will say is that for everything that's in the natural marriage that's available as the good, it's also in the sacramental marriage. So everything that's in a natural marriage is in a sacramental marriage. Not everything that's in the sacramental marriage will be in the natural marriage. We're going to cover both, but let's begin first with what a natural marriage is actually for. The first thing it's for is conjugal partnership, this innate inclination for stability and union that is in the lives of all human beings, right? Like we are all ordered towards order and, higher things. So, in order to promote that, we need a certain degree of stability. And with the human desire for union, for love, for the conjugal act, marriage provides a stabilizing, ordered institution for that to take place. Turning to quickly here in the Catechism, paragraph 1603, it says, the vocation of marriage is written in the very nature of man and woman as they came from the hand of the Creator. Marriage is not purely a human institution, despite the many variations it may have undergone through the centuries, in these different cultures, social structures, and spiritual attitudes. These differences should not cause us to forget its common and permanent characteristics. Although the dignity of this institution is not transparent everywhere with the same clarity, some sense of the greatness of the marital union exists in all cultures. All cultures are, in some sense, ultimately striving for this union and this stability, as we'll see the CCC says here, comes from it. Let's see. Since God created man and woman with their mutual love, becomes an image of the absolute and unfailing love with which God loves man. It is good, very good in the Creator's eyes. And this love which God blesses is intended to be fruitful and to be realized in the common work of watching over creation. Which leads me to the next thing. Marriage, in the natural sense, is about procreation and the education of children. It's objectively true that the continuation of society is a good thing. Now, whether that society be Christian or not is a different subject than whether or not society's existing is a good thing. Yes, we would want all cultures ultimately to be Christian cultures, but if the option is between a non-Christian culture existing or not existing, it's better for the culture to exist. And then for us to come in and to evangelize said culture. If the culture didn't exist at all, we would have no one, there would be no pagans, there would be no one to evangelize out there, right? So it is good for a culture, for a society to exist. Now, it follows from that that in order to have a culture, in order to have a society, you must have children. Foundational to all of that is any culture can have children. That's not going to like add to the social cohesion and the perpetuation of society and culture. You must have children that you are properly educating. You must have children that you are yourself teaching about the value of union of love between a man and a woman and a lifelong commitment and the stability that that provides for the culture that you are seeking to continue into the future. Now, of course, we're going to get into it again. Grace elevates these things, but on the natural level, children are the bedrock of any society, and any society, in order for it to survive, must have children. So, having the children is that starting point, but educating them for the and the promulgation of their well-being leads to the well-being of the society because societies are made up of individuals. So it's about social cohesion and stability. I will say that with the natural marriage, that the emphasis tends to be on, and I'm not making like a moral judgment on this, I'm just saying it's the reality. It seems to me that the emphasis is more on the common good than the individual good, right? So you'll see a lot of people in marriages that I shared a video of it on X the other day. It's this mom and she's like, I don't know if she's Christian or not, but she's having kind of a breakdown. I think it was like TikTok or something like that. And she's just talking about how stressful being a mother is, and it's just a constant job, and it's not and she's probably just having a moment. This is like people tend to extract things from these like little moments that people have, like it's like a 30-second clip, and we're supposed to like extract all of these like grand narratives from that. She could just be had like a rough day, more than likely, but the takeaway was supposed to be about how hard motherhood is and about how, unthankful the task is and what is it all for. So, but I will acknowledge that marriage, in a natural sense, principally provides for the common good of a community of people. It's not that there isn't good that comes out of it for the individuals, but that good is the fruit of that good is really for the good of the common community, the commonwealth. That's my personal takeaway as far as I can see these things. Whereas with the sacramental marriage, which is elevated, you have two individuals who are faced with all of the same problems, all of the same hardships. It's not like you don't enter a sacramental marriage and all of a sudden you're like in the clouds above the rest of humanity. You're down in the filth with them. It's just that a natural marriage doesn't have the means to achieve holiness in the ordinary sense through those hardships. So, with a natural marriage, some of the perks, the conjugal love, the children, the mutual support of the two individuals, that's there. But what you don't have is this thing that we're going to be discussing next, which are the fruits of the sacramental marriage. And so, with the sacramental marriage, again, the thing to acknowledge here is that it is also going to be tough. Like life is tough. None of this is to promise people that to be married, right? Like Andrew Tate said, like what good is marriage? And then he's got a follow-up tweet where it's him with his Bugattis and his mansion and things. And this is happiness, right? A very like anybody that's got any level of philosophical knowledge knows that the things that he's saying are the apex of happiness. We all know, at least in the Greek philosophic sense, are very way down on the bottom of what's actually provides happiness. But at the same time, we're not saying that there isn't hardship that comes along with this institution that we call marriage. So we should acknowledge all the time, whether we're Catholic, whether we're talking about a Catholic sacramental marriage or natural marriage, that the institution, the reality of it is that it's tough. But it's still better for us and it's better for society, us as in the two individuals, man and woman, and it's better for society to promote exclusive monogamous marriages. Even, and this is one of the key takeaways I want to take from what Andrew was saying in that clip earlier, even if we are to exclude the government involvement in the institution of marriage, because if you think about it, what are the criteria for a natural marriage? The two individuals have to consent to it. There needs to be a capacity for it, and they need to view it as a lifelong commitment. There's nothing in there that states that in order for the Catholic Church to acknowledge the validity of natural marriages that take place in a society, that you have to have that government certificate. So, in my mind, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking if we were to grant to young men that the situation is tough right now and that the court system and the government systems and all of these things are geared towards no fault divorce, alimony, infidelity, whatever the things are out there, gosh, I would have to have a long conversation on the sort of shaky bedrock that a lot of marriages among young people are started upon today. It's mainly about mutual attraction and some degree of lust that two people have for one another, and then they sort of see that as the thing that propels them to decide to get marriage. So when your marriages are built upon those kinds of things, then yeah, you're gonna struggle to find purpose and fortitude to see yourself through into this lifelong commitment when there's just options that are easy. Now they claim, and I've never looked into this, so don't quote me on this, but they claim that the majority of divorces today are instigated by women, the wife in the marriage. And that could be true. I don't know to what that could be 51%, that could be 90%. But that's a tell for this crowd of men that are telling young men to just sort of thwart the whole concept of marriage and toss it into the dustbin of history. It's sort of a way to that they justify that. But I'm of the opinion that we as Catholics could come along and say, look, if there is two people, they've got the right idea that marriage is a lifelong commitment. It's a man and a woman. There's no they have the capacity to be married. They could give their public mutual consent to a marriage. And as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, those two people are married at that point. That is a valid marriage. The husband has an obligation to the wife for a lifelong commitment. The wife has an obligation to the husband for a lifelong commitment. Now, granted, there's no legal protections for either in said scenario, but if the concern here is just that there is so much financial incentive for couples to dissolve their marriages and take them to the divorce courts, and so therefore we should not be, having marriages at all, I would say we should just be looking at it with a different lens. Ideally, what would happen in any given culture and society is that the government, in so much as it gets involved, I mean, the ideal thing would be we would have a Catholic state where the government, is in line with traditional Catholic teachings on these things. But that's the ideal state. The next thing would be that we have a government that's sort of neutral and allows religious marriages to take place without a lot of intervention. Basically, the government signs off that it acknowledges that two people are married and this is how you file your taxes, that kind of thing. This is how you handle inheritance at death and these kinds of things. But the situation that we're in now, which I think is something that Catholics could agree to, is that we have a government that's in the United States and probably most of Europe, if not most of the world, that is actively hostile to the Christian concept of even a natural marriage, and that they are, in a sense, demonically incentivizing people to dissolve their natural lifelong unions. So, yeah, I think we could acknowledge all of that, and we could even potentially like reduce marriage down, because that's the other thing with the historical context of this. When these debates, the reason these debates around marriage got so contested and kind of hot in the high Middle Ages was because you were finally dealing with a truly Christian culture that has seen the early centuries of the church just sort of navigating first how not to die in a persecution, in a pogrom. The second phase was the instability of all the barbarian raids, and then you start to build up a culture. And then by the time you get to the ninth, 10th, 11th centuries, you've had a few centuries of that culture forming and building up. And there's generations of Christians at this point now. And then you have canon lawyers that are going out and they're reviewing these things, and the canon law is starting to be formed, and then the canon lawyers are going back to precedents to these things. So you have like a truly Catholic culture that is looking at the reality of marriage in the 1000s and the 1100s. One of the realities is that a couple might go off into the woods and they'd come back and they'd say, "We're married, right? We got married out there in the woods." And most people would at that point just assume that they were married. But then you would have this problem where a decade later, however long later, the wife is born a few children. She's not looking as attractive anymore. Maybe I never did actually marry her, right? And he could challenge the fact that they were ever married. And then the church is looking at this and they don't have any like documentation of it, they don't have any witness to it. So it became a common thing that in order for even a natural marriage to take place, there should be public witnesses. And then you would have you would call out for certain objections to be made, right? You would give people time to make their objections if there was some sense in which these two people were not capable, whether they were related, they were already in a marriage or something like that. So all of these things are developing out of a culture that's faced with both natural and sacramental marriage and the like challenges to either one. Because again, remember, we said all of the things that come with a sacramental marriage are also included in the natural marriage. So sacramental marriage, it's important that you have witnesses. And that way, later, when the canon lawyers are looking at whether or not this is a valid marriage or not, they can see, okay, the consent was there, public consent was given. So, look, what I'm trying to say with this is that if we live in a place, because in those days, you could just go off into the woods if you had one or two witnesses who were willing to testify on your behalf that this was marriage, you could have it signed off on. They would come back, and that was a binding marriage as far as the church was concerned. And then, especially once it started to get out into the local community, hey, Bob and Sarah over there, they had a public announcement that they are in this union together. We recognize it. Once the community starts to recognize it, that's once again a validation that the marriage is true. So if we had a situation where the government is hostile to marriage and they create a situation where it's a not only like a neutral for people to get married, but also can like severely negatively affect them, then I see no reason why we shouldn't just continue the process. And this would maybe be something that, I doubt if Andrew Tate would agree with this, but this may be something that possibly Andrew Wilson would agree with, where we just acknowledge marriage at a community level. And at that community level, this natural marriage is held to the same standards that a sacramental marriage would be, because I think most of these people would agree, possibly even Andrew Tate, but I think most of these people that are on our side of this would agree. our side is in the cultural wars that are taking place, would agree that overall, whether we're talking Catholic or not, overall, a culture where it's a man and a woman who are in a lifelong commitment to one another, where they have children, they're committed to each other, they're committed to those children and to the education of those children, that is a net good for all of us. And to promote that at whatever level of society that we promote it at, because eventually what would happen is if we all did that, even if we didn't have our marriages recognized by the government, and I know I'm suggesting something kind of radical here, but I'm just trying to illustrate, even if we didn't have our marriages recognized, natural marriages recognized by the government, it would eventually produce children who would then grow up to be adults. They would have children who would grow up to be adults, and these people would eventually be the ones that are making the laws. And with a healthier society, we could maybe undo some of the like radical things that these people, these demonic things that they have done to marriage. The other thing I would like to acknowledge here is that some of the things that Andrew Tate and some of these other guys, these red pill guys, are suggesting, there's nothing. If we're going to go back into history, this is the options that we're faced with, and I think Catholics, you guys have to do like a better job and more real assessment of the way that things work in the real world. And there's truth to the fact that you can have a sustainable, even to a degree, a healthy society where there is polygamy in the sense that it is a patriarchal polygamous society where you could have certain men of certain caliber who have basically access to all the women and they take those women as wives. We have examples of that. I could run through the various situations in history where we have examples of that. And those some of those cultures survived and in some sense thrived for centuries. And we can't deny that. But the reality of that is, on the flip side, there's also always a whole lot of men who just don't make the cut. If you have a society, which it seems like this is kind of where, and Andrew Tate and none of these guys quite acknowledge this, these red pill guys, they acknowledge this, that they're talking about men being sort of like apex alpha man, right? The men on the top. Well, the top of that pyramid is very narrow, and that's only going to be a handful of men. Let's say 5% of the entire male population. And Andrew Tate and these guys are saying, look, all of the women are going to gravitate towards that the top tier men. But what they don't acknowledge is that it's a tight space up there at the top 5%. And that's going to leave 95% of the men out of the loop. And so when you have that, what you end up doing ultimately is creating something that is a unstabilizing factor. It creates instability. When resources become depleted, men will often create situations of high instability, sometimes just out of boredom, right? Sometimes men, if they have too much time on their hands and not enough things to occupy themselves and they're bored, they will destroy things. That's just the nature of it. So these guys are talking about, look, you want to be the guy that gets all the girls, right? Well, there's only so many guys that are going to do that. And it appears, at least on a surface level, whether this becomes a long-term thing that we're all going to have to be faced with, it appears that the young women in the dating market right now are going towards that top tier of men. It seems to be that a lot of them are willing to say, look, I'll just forego a relationship altogether, especially as women are sort of working their way up the economic ladder, the educational ladder. They're not like dating the guys that are just sort of at the bottom by and large. Now, there might be a case where, there's an exceptionally charismatic or attractive guy that a woman is willing to date, but we're talking about general trends here, and the general trend seems to be that as a woman gets higher in her education, as she gets higher in her economic status, she tends to date and marry at that level or higher than herself. And we're also reaching a tipping point where there's going to be more women who are making money at a higher level than men. Going to be women who are higher educated. I think we've long passed that. There's women are way more highly educated than men. There's a small cohort of men that will meet that educational and that financial level, and then it seems like by and large, a lot of women will forego marriage, they'll forego the relationship just to have some access to that guy that's at the highest status. How much we're going to move towards that direction, I don't know. I think you would gaslight me to say that this hasn't happened historically, and you would gaslight the young men who are pointing this out to say that this isn't happening. I don't think any of us quite know. I think it's very reasonable to assume that that's the trajectory that things will be headed in. But again, you always have to realize that in the background, as this more and more, let's say it's 60% of women will go for like just 5% of men. I'm just kind of throwing some numbers out there. Well, you still have that 95% of men out there who are going to be like whatever what you got 40 you'd have 40% of women left at that point. 95% of men are going to be fighting for access to those 40% of women. And even that would still leave, like, let's say 55% of men who just aren't going to have access because the ones that are left are going to be taken by that 40% of men who happen to get the remaining 40% of women. And so you're still going to have a 55% plus surplus of men who will have no option for a wife, a partner. And this, I'm telling you, creates social instability. So, for the better of the culture and the health and the well being of all of us, it's better actually if we, as a society, check the impulses of these women who might be inclined to do this, who would otherwise gravitate towards those men who provide them with the most resources, and instead puts the social pressure back on an egalitarian society where the ratio, since the demographic ratio is typically like close to one, there's slightly more women than men in any no, excuse me, slightly more men than women in any culture, but by and large, by what's available, you could have healthy societies with most men having a partner. And that seems to be, if you have a culture that promotes monogamy in this sense, you end up with long term the healthiest possibilities for the culture. Because all of these men at this point have a partner. Of course, this excludes the idea of, religious and those who remain consecrated celibates, if we're talking about this in a Catholic context. But I'm really just talking about the culture that we're sort of stuck with right now today. And this is, I think, the reality that a lot of people are faced with today. There was a debate, because Matt Walsh is kind of part, like within these culture wars a lot. He was debating with, I think it was Megan Kelly or somebody like that, or maybe some of these other like young women I'm not familiar with. Emily or something was one of their names. I can't quite remember where she's from or who she is, but they're saying like, well, we just want to have options for women, right? And I think you could almost at like a I don't know. I personally tend to be skeptical of the libertarian concept that everything should just be like an even playing field because the reality is there's never an even playing field ever in anything. All of individual dynamics, group dynamics, cultural dynamics, world dynamics, there's uneven options for people and uneven playing fields for people. So this whole concept that like, look, we just want women to have a choice. Do they want to go for a career or do they want to or do they even want to be like, will they sacrifice one man who maybe makes less than them or whatever for the good of the culture, right? Will they sacrifice that for this other man who makes? We just want like women to have the choice. That's all there is to it. And I think and I think Matt gets this. I don't know if he presses, I don't like follow it closely enough, but I don't know if he presses the point home enough that social pressures is actually what the conversation's about. I would almost, for the sake of argument, be willing to grant, okay, yeah, like we live in this world where people just have free reign of choices and they're not influenced by externals and they're like just choose based on what their innate impulse is to do something. Whereas I say, no, look, like the reality is there's social pressures that are put on people. And right now, the social pressure on women is to get educated, to make as much money as possible, to, all of these things that are in some sense at one time were for the better of society reserved for men, typically, at least in the culture that we produced here in the West in America. And so then what you're left with is a culture that more and more and more promotes that, which more and more leads to the instability that we're seeing. Whereas I think if we're talking about it from that level, then really what we're trying to say is that for the better of society, in a non-Christian secular world that we're going to live in, the overall cultural pressure should be towards women being in monogamous relationships with one man for a lifelong commitment that, hopefully will produce children for the couple. And then they dedicate themselves to the raising and rearing of said children. That would be the ideal scenario. And within that scenario, we could say that the public recognition, at least by the community of people, is enough to bind those two people together. Where in 10 years, if they say they're going to get a divorce, a lot of this is about what I'm saying. Like you would say, okay, well, what's the ramifications for people that deviate from that? It would really just kind of be the ramifications of what people dealt with in the past. In the past, if a man abandoned his naturally married wife and he was going off and sleeping with someone else, he would be ostracized from the community in many sense. He would lose access to certain privileges that we all receive when we follow the norms of a culture. So, he's not in a sacramental marriage, but he was in a natural marriage. He abandoned the woman that he had committed to for a lifelong commitment. And then he goes and he's living with someone else. Well, that woman would always be seen as a mistress. He would always be seen as being outside of the married state. So he would be breaking the commandment at that point, breaking the sixth commandment. And yeah, no, he would be responsible to the community and he would lose access to certain privileges that he would have had otherwise. And the last thing I'll say is I think that we should just acknowledge that natural marriage is hard for people. We don't want to like just go in and say, "Hey, get married. It's easy. It's better for you." It is better for society, but it's not necessarily better for the two individuals in that moment when they're having an argument about something serious, right? Like maybe he did something stupid and got fired from his job. Maybe she spent too much on the credit card, right? Like the weight of the world can be on couples at times when they're like caught in the fog of war. We're talking today like largely about the societal impact for the need for natural marriages, but I think we should acknowledge that society is made up of individuals and natural marriage is hard. And remember, we said everything basically that applies to the natural marriage is going to apply to the sacramental marriage. A sacramental marriage is hard. The thing that we have, though, is that we have the gift of grace and perseverance, and that we can actually grow in holiness through those trials. And that when we experience the union of love that a couple will experience in a natural marriage, the church says in a sacramental marriage, that union of love is even greater. It's to a higher degree. It's more godlike. It's more divine. And so the rewards are greater. And then the ability to persevere through it is greater. So I think as like Catholics, we need to be like fair in our assessments that look, yes, it's better for you to be in a natural marriage than to be in these like either single or to be in these states of like, you know, infidelity and polygamy and constantly like running to the next partner. Like natural marriage is better than that. But sacramental marriage is even better than that, right? So we always need to be pushing people towards being Catholic. But So this is kind of my wind down here. That's what I had to say to you guys about this topic. I do think that young men have a point, but the answers that they're getting, I haven't seen on either side the best of what should be provided to them, which I think is a balanced approach of the reality of the harshness of life, of marriage, of the dynamics, the strife that is placed between man and woman. I mean, look, the Lord said, He said there will be natural marriage, but after the fall, when we see that natural marriage would be there for the whole of the rest of humanity, there was also going to be strife between the couples, right? The woman would want to rebel against her husband. Like, so we're not like promising this like rosy picture thing, right? There's challenges, there's hardships. Sometimes we do these things for the sake of duty. If you're in a natural marriage, I still think we have an obligation to promote natural marriage in a society and to promote the wives to commit themselves to having and rearing children and to promote the community involvement of helping to rear those children. Like all of these things, I think we could do on a natural level, and then with the added element of grace coming in and helping us to, it's not that it removes us from the trials and the struggles, it helps us persevere and helps us to grow in holiness. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave some comments. My comment section has been kind of dwindling a little bit. I don't know if that's just because it's summer. But anyways, I really enjoy, even if I can't get back to you, I enjoy all the comments that you guys have, even if you disagree. I know this is a hot topic. A lot of people, I really don't like the man versus woman dynamics that is taking place online right now. Like, look, I am a realist when it comes to the dynamics of men and women. I do think that generally speaking, society privileges women more than it privileges men. I don't necessarily make a descriptive thing about that because I think society actually has an obligation to privilege women because they are the ones that at least potentially should be mothers. But when you have a society that privileges women but doesn't actually actualize that potentiality, then you'd start to deal with the really like breakdown and the strife that we're sort of faced with today. Look, I mean, the chivalric code and these things, I know it's under a lot of fire right now, but they were born out of a Christian culture and the obligation that we have towards one another, but particularly as men, as individuals towards women, but men as a whole towards women. At the same time, women are highly rebellious. I'm very realistic about this, right? Women are highly rebellious. They're highly emotional in their responses to things. And they look, some of the biggest critics that I meet are of women, are women. And you get a lot of the like, if you can, if you as a guy ever have the like fortunate opportunity to like truly become friends with a woman that there's like no chance of like sexual interest, right? Like I mean, I was raised like I had sisters, and I had a young lady. She's deceased now, but she was like the only woman that was not my family member that I was kind of raised around that I never had any interest in because I was raised around her, and I had like real we had like the real conversations, right? And she was like filled me in when I was like 16 or 17 about the reality of how girls operate. And I've always carried those like lessons with me throughout my life. So, yeah, like women get very, and I get it, right? When somebody's coming after you, you see this like horde of men that you have no idea who they are, and they're like wagging their fingers at you about, something that you may not even be a part of. You tend to get a little defensive, but I think when you sort of are able to step back and sort of be more neutral, really the biggest criticisms I've ever seen of women tend to come from other women, and the most realistic criticisms that I tend to see come from other women. Sometimes men actually have way too naive a view of women and their innocence and these things. But anyways, that's getting way far afield. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. God bless.